So next we're looking at the memorial dimension of Eucharist. In particular, we'll first take a look at the Eucharist in the Old Testament. And we'll spend some time with this by reading an article from the USCCB website that I found on basically the Jewish foundations for the Eucharist. I was contemplating giving you a list of about 50 scripture verses to look up because there is such a richness of resources, of connections between the Old Testament and the Eucharist, but I decided against that and instead wanted to focus on two key pieces of Old Testament that really support the Eucharist. The Feast of the Passover and the unleavened bread that's eaten, and the flesh of the roasted lamb that's eaten, and the blood of the lamb that comes from Passover. And then also the manna that's provided to the Israelites in the desert that sustains them, that nourishes them on their journey. So we'll take a closer look at that with that article. In the New Testament, there's also, a whole bunch of resources, but just to zero in on the key ones, the story of the multiplication of the loaves. In this story, of course, Jesus multiplies a few loaves and fish to provide for everyone who's gathered listening to him, either 4,000 or 5,000 people, depending on which evangelist you consult. And there's plenty left over, so that they're all satisfied, which is key. And in this story, Jesus takes the bread, blesses it, breaks it, and gives it to his disciples. And to all those who are gathered listening there. And that's a really important pattern for what becomes our Eucharistic celebration. And it also is echoed in the Last Supper. The story of the wedding at Cana, where Jesus changes water into wine, this meal foreshadows the wedding feast of the kingdom. And you'll see during Jesus' final hours, he makes a reference to that, the wine and the wedding feast in the kingdom. And then finally, the bread of life discourse, which we're going to watch because it is such a powerful piece of scripture from John's Gospel, chapter 6, where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. You who come to me will never be hungry. You who believe in me will never be thirsty. And he goes on and identifies himself as bread that gives life. Which of course foreshadows the Eucharist. But the thing that has the most implications for the Eucharist in Scripture, obviously, is the Last Supper. It's mentioned in all the Gospels, but we're going to take a look at Luke. This meal takes the Jewish Passover to the next level, if you will. Of course, that's a very Christian-biased perspective. I'm sure Jewish people would not agree. But we'll talk about how it kind of gives the Jewish Passover its ultimate meaning. And we'll talk about how the Last Supper establishes the need for the church to celebrate the Eucharist and the command to do this in memory of me. And so where Jesus commands his apostles and his disciples to do this in his memory, and we've done a very good job of celebrating the Eucharist in his memory. This is one reason why it's so important, because he told us to.